up in, can't remember, I think it was in Ian's, but I can't remember. One of the issues that came up is the Noahide Covenant, that all human beings have an obligation to a basic level of moral decency. And one of the debates that comes up with the rabbis, so you can answer this debate yourself, is, do people need to be told that? So is the Noahide Covenant, the 7 laws that basically involve the fact that you have to have laws, like laws need to be there. And you have to have, as Maimonides expands, like some kind of legal system, some way for the law to work. There must be some basic principles of justice, even if they're not exactly ours. There's got to be some kind of sense of fairness that goes into that. And as the rabbis expand the list, one may not physically, sexually take advantage of other people. One cannot take captives who are civilians and commit torture, and that these represent basic human decency. So the debate is, do you have to be told that after the flood? So like, Noah gets told, as you guys pointed out to me, Noah gets told, don't eat the blood of living animals. And so like, okay, like maybe we had to be told that, you know what I mean? But how about the other ones? So the rabbis debate, and ultimately most of the rabbis come down on the fact that you don't have to be told those things that actually occurred. They derive it from chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis, that Adam and Eve inherently already had that built in to the nature of being human. So I take that side of the debate. So basic rules of human decency. Today, I find too much in the press and in the voices around me, a moral equivalency going on between the way the Israeli government, the Israeli state is conducting themselves, and the way Hamas is conducting itself. And it's hard to avoid in this parasha when it says that the reason God brought the flood upon humanity was because of Hamas. Like, you can't avoid that. And the word came up multiple times in the Torah portion. Now, it's interesting because Hamas is not from the biblical word. Hamas, the organization, the movement, is an acronym for Harakat Amukvama al-Islamiyah, which means the Islamic resistance movement. Hamas is also a word in Arabic that means zeal. And their charter is an Islamic state throughout the entire area from the river to the sea. And the Jews are infidels to be murdered or expelled. Now, so it's hard to miss of the word that, what is this Hamas in the Torah? Meaning, what I said before, it's this human violence against other people, but a particular kind of violence, as I already mentioned, I won't repeat it, that is basic human decency. So we have something that was written out, and that's why I'll jump to that. I'll keep it short. In philosophy, there are people that took the time to write out something called the laws of just wars. It actually has a whole history. Do you know who wrote a whole tome on the laws of just wars? Maimonides, the author of our legal codes, along with Shulchan Aruch. So it's not a new concept. But in modernity, it was kind of made famous in England by W.B. Galley, my mother's mentor, and in this country by Michael Walzer, among others, who's at Harvard. And he spoke up this week, which is, so what is just war theory? Is it a complex set of facts that you really have to learn? It would have to be delivered to you. You would have to sit there and study and be like, I never thought of this. It never would have come to me on my own. I am so glad the professor told me this just war theory. It's actually very, very simple. Just and Unjust Wars by Michael Walzer argues that for a war to be just, there must be a just cause. It must be declared by a lawful authority. All the other ways of resolving the conflict must have been exhausted. There must be a reasonable chance of success. There must be a net benefit, and there must be proportionality. Given that Hamas's signature tactic seems to be to force Israel to kill civilians by placing military assets in places where there are a lot of civilians, like schools and hospitals, is it possible for Israel to fight a just war against Hamas? And Mike Walzer answers, it is possible. You know why? Because it has to be possible. What it means to execute a just war is to target, as I wrote in the congregation earlier, to target tactical or military targets. In the case where there are civilian casualties by accident, maybe that's an area that needs to be studied more deeply. That is not desired, and that is an issue around it. But that is completely different than targeting civilians with Hamas. I noticed there was a rally in Canada in solidarity with Palestine, and I was reading the interviews with the people who attended the rally, and they said, well, I'm just curious, like, if it's the river to the sea, like, what does that mean for the Israelis and Jews to live there? And I think people who have maybe never met a Palestinian and were very well educated were answering, well, the Jews need to leave or they'll be killed. Which I think is a fascinating thing, violating the laws of human decency as I understand it, to be saying as a political view or as even a moral view. So how would Israel conduct a just war at this time? Michael Walzer says, as the American army has also largely done, and Israel has done in its past, it unfortunately means taking military casualties because you put the military in harm's way in order to target the real threat and not to have innocent civilians get killed in the process. So you do not target civilians. I don't believe Israel has, and I believe all the propaganda is ridiculous. But as Michael Walzer says, and as comes out of today's Torah portion, you can't fight a war of vengeance justly. There has to be, as I said earlier, a reasonable chance of success and real net benefit. And there has to be a sense of what a future will look like based on the tactical actions one is taking. As Michael Walzer says, we certainly can't be confident in this situation, especially given that we really don't know how Israel intends to fight this war. The current prime minister seems to try to play the role of an angel of vengeance, perhaps, to make up for his actual responsibilities for what happened. And if they fight a war of vengeance, it's not likely to end well for anybody. I think that just war theory is the Noahide Covenant for this month, for this week, and for these months. It is a directive of basic human decency that gives us a way to distinguish moral from Hamas. And may we act in the moral ways. And in this Noahide covenant of just war, in everything that follows. But if Jews are being asked to say, I need you to speak up and say that the Israelis are prosecuting this conflict in the same way that Hamas is, I stand against it. And as I said, and this week, as someone I admire said, well, Jews are guilty of genocide. I said, it's interesting because 1 million Palestinian refugees from 1948, 48 million Ashkenazic Jews killed in the Holocaust at this point. 1 million have become 8 million, but we are guilty of genocide. Gaza is an open air prison. There wasn't always guards there. Do we remember what happened when guards weren't there? Hamas happened repeatedly, right? There is no place for the Palestinians to go. They are the original ones in this land. As I've said many times, I'm happy to grant indigeneity to both sides, but it's very weird to stand here and be talking about the expulsion in 586, and when somehow we are denying the Jews are indigenous to the land. It's the fault of a right-wing government. There is fault of a right-wing government and of the settlements. But do people remember that at the time of the Nakba in 1948, between 1949 and 1952, 800,000 Jews were expelled from Arab countries. That is a greater number, or let's say the same number, as Palestinian refugees during the same time. And approximately 600,000 of them came to Israel. And many of them vote for right-wing governments, and I wonder why. maybe we see something of the cycle of vengeance and the cycle of Hamas in what the consequences are today. I'd like to finish with something that came from the Haftarah today, and I pointed out last night, and it's in the prayer book on page 25. On page 25, we have the last 3 verses of L'chadodi. And these were written in Sfat in the land of Israel. It's probably in the margin. I always think of the 1500s, but I may have it wrong. I may be 1 century off, as I often am. This was written in Sfat in Israel, largely by a community who was expelled from Spain. And many of them, as we know, lost children and spouses in the expulsion and in making their way to freedom in the land of Israel. And this is what they write, following the Crusades, following conquest and following death in their own families. And it speaks to me today. The first verse, your despoilers shall be despoiled, your tormentors removed far away. God and you will celebrate together as a bride and groom in joyful embrace. And here from the Haftarah today, you will spread out to the left and to the right, acclaiming Adonai our God with delight, redeeming the flower of Peretz's line, joyously chanting songs of praise. So in the first verse, they're saying, may those who have persecuted us, those who have committed Hamas against us, may they suffer the fate that God intends for them. But then they move to number 2, God spreading out to the left and to the right. And as Kabbalah scholars will tell you, that was written at the intent that the left and the right was where they were saying it in Sfat. It should branch out to the right, persecution in Europe, and branch out to the left, persecution in Arab lands. Interestingly, today, the contours of potential Arab state would be Gaza and the West Bank, literally to the left and to the right of what a 2-state Israel would be in the middle. But it also meant for them a oneness and peace of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, because they said it as Shabbat entered. And when they say, may the Spirit of God, quoting from 2nd Isaiah, spread out to the left and right, they meant it to be spreading out from the Shabbat of the Jews on Saturday to the mosque calls and prayers of Islam on Fridays, and to the church bells and prayers of the Christians in the land on Sundays. They went for, may Hamas get what's coming to them, and our freedom and redemption be granted, but let peace spread so that we find a way to all live together under God's Sukkot Shalom. And that is when they turn and they face and they welcome God's presence into their Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.